Hi, and welcome to Module 2. This is kind of just beginning to get into the basics of arguments, and it's getting into what an argument is. Not everything is an argument, and so that's kind of the first thing is, an argument typically has two things it attempts to do. It has statements called premises that are used to support a conclusion, so that's sort of what it has. And so there's two things that occur in an argument. There is a factual claim and there's an inferential claim. The factual claim is the claim that the statements you are making is true, that you're saying things that are true, and so thus, you're building upon the truth or facts. The other thing is that it also purports to have an inferential claim, which is the idea that these statements being true when linked together in such a way will prove some further truth or some further idea, which is your conclusion. And so inferential claims, there's sort of two things. There's an inferential claim and a factual claim. And the inferential claim is the thing we'll spend a lot of time in philosophy evaluating, which is basically, is this a deductive or inductive inferential claim? Is this inferential claim good? Is it bad? The inferential claim is just the idea that the ideas work together to prove the point. That, if I say dogs are canines and I have a cat, so it's a feline, well, there's no logic, there's no argument. I mean, those are just statements. There's no argument in that. There's nothing that one statement is purporting or helping to support another one. Those are all just loosely associated ideas or statements. I don't even know if they're associated. They're just statements, right? But if you say all dogs are canines, I have a dog named Fido, Fido is therefore a canine, well, then that would be have an inferential claim. That would actually be a deductively valid claim, because it's a categorical type of argument, and so that's what you would evaluate. The other thing is the factual claim. The factual claim is the idea that the statements you make are in fact true or in fact factually based. And so we kind of wanted, before we do it, we want to be able to differentiate that not all statements are truth or factual, and some of them are value-based. Now, value-based statements can be true, but they're not necessarily as easy to, they're oftentimes interpretations of facts, or they're conclusions. Well, they're not conclusions, they're interpretations oftentimes, but oftentimes they're generally shared, and so they can have value in an argument, but we just need to kind of make sure we kind of take that apart and look and say, well, this isn't technically a fact, this is more of an interpretation or a value. The other side is factual claims. And there's two types of factual claims. There's what we call empirically verifiable factual claims, and then there are analytic factual claims. Analytic is a little bit, it's the idea of, it's also called a priori. It means it's without prior knowledge. It means that these are statements that are just, there's a truth that is just there, that we don't have to go out and prove it with science or facts. And then empirically verifiable means you go out and you prove it with science and with observation. Empirical means basically observable through your five senses. And so, you can see things like where, like how, if a car is red, you can see that. If a car made a sound, you can hear that. So these are things you can do. But you can also use tests. Like you can put, something on a strip and it'll, the pH will come out, or you can find out what the level of lead in water is, things like this. I mean, those are all empirical because they're basically taking the physical reality and using methods of our senses or through other chemical methods or other methods to measure and get some sort of empirical analysis. And so what happens is analytic, on the other hand, is the idea like math or definitions, where like we define something like a bachelor is an unmarried male, and so then we say Joe is a bachelor, therefore Joe is unmarried. It's just simply a statement that comes out of the very fact of the definition. And so those are what we call analytic truths. Oftentimes, like the way I use an example of this is like, if you're going to design a building, you're an engineer, you go out and you do all your research, you figure out how much weight everything can hold, what the wind force is going to be on the sides, things like this, how the stresses are going to be on the building, and you design up the entire thing, and then you figure out, well, these bolts will hold it, this steel will hold it, this design will work, things like that, right? But then we want to put the building, perhaps if you're an engineer, you want to put it into like maybe you build a model and you put it in a wind tunnel and make sure it holds up, do things like that. And that's what we would call empirical. So the first one's more theoretical. We know what the pressures are, we know what the theoretical limits are, we know what the theoretical idea for the math, you know, the stresses and the weights and everything on a bolt and everything else. But then we actually put it into the real world and we test it, and that's an empirical test. And, you know, building might seem weird, but like if you're building an engine, you might have an idea that if we build the engine this way, it's going to be able to reach these speeds. Then you build the engine and you figure out we missed some fact in this. And then that's what we call an empirical test. And then values are interpretations. And interpretations are often things like, they're oftentimes agreed upon, like things like murder is wrong, I think is maybe even a true factual statement, but it is, or a true value statement, not factual, true value statement. But murder is wrong is still an interpretation. Like, what does wrong mean? Can I measure that? Can I see that? Is that definitional? Maybe. Or is it something that is an interpretation upon the consequences of somebody being murdered that we come to the conclusion that we interpret it as wrong? Pizza's yummy. You know, not everybody agrees with that. And so you have to be aware that not everything is a factual statement. And so one of the things, the reason I bring this up is because I want you to be aware that sometimes people say things and they're widely accepted, but they're not factually, you know, true. Like, say, for example, like I say, like, such and such is an expensive restaurant. Okay, that might very well be, but what makes an expensive restaurant? I mean, is it, you know, what you consider expensive may not be the same as what I consider expensive, or what I consider expensive may be, you know, way lower than what you consider expensive. And so, you know, that would be an interpretation. I'm 6 foot tall. I have a lot of friends who are like 6'2", 6'3". I have a group of friends that are all like 6'2", 6'3". One of us, last couple times we met, we hung out. This has been several years ago because they're friends from college, but the only one who was shorter than me didn't come. And so, you know, I'm 6 foot and they're all 6'3", 6'2", and I'm like the short guy, right? So even though like in most contexts, 6 foot is tall, but in that context, it's not. And so if you say so-and-so is tall, that's not as good as saying so-and-so is 6 feet tall, right? Because that is an interpretation. So that's the way it goes. Now, why does all this matter? Because the best way to win an argument is not to sit there and try to argue your position. It's to take the other person's position and tell them they're wrong. And so if they go out and they tell you that, you know, Joe is tall, and you say, well, what does that mean? And in this context, that's not true. Or if they say, you know, this place is expensive. Well, what does expensive mean? You take apart the premises or the statements that support their argument, and that's the way you win an argument. And so all of these value factual statements is a way of saying, like, let's break down what kind of factual statement is it? Is this an interpretation, or is this analytic or empirically verifiable, or is this an interpretation? If it's an interpretation, then is this interpretation something that stands the test? And if it doesn't stand the test, then that's the place you assail the argument. You don't win an argument by arguing your point. You win an argument by knocking the other person's legs off. You know, you win an argument by dismissing the points they make in their argument, not by trying to make your point.